The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Winemakers Podcast with Sam Couturi, Brian Casey, and Bart Hansen, with special guest Carlton McCoy.
Yeah!
Wow. You got a future in that.
I think we can't do that anymore because when the guest does a better job than we do, it makes us look bad.
My God, you're hired.
That's great.
Well, that's been a great show. I think we should just end it on a high note.
I know. It's like literally a perfect voice for
Yeah.
intonation and
She was
everything.
so excited about it.
Who knew? Angela's been holding out on her radio voice. We need a radio voice now.
We can talk later
We'll
about
talk radio voices.
new intros too.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. You guys, I'm gonna bounce because we got like 3 more appointments coming here in the next half an hour.
What are you bragging?
We're busy because we make really good wine. I don't make the wine.
Who does? Who knows?
That's what we were just actually talking about. Angela said that in Michigan, she goes to a restaurant that is pouring Gassier Viognier by the glass.
Ooh, I've seen that on her Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was like, "You guys should come. We don't have any good California Rhone wines, but we got Gassier."
The Gassiers make way more wine than us. They can have a few more placements.
Right, exactly. But we love you, Michigan. We just wish it was easier to ship to you.
I am legal in the state of Michigan.
The big boss.
Yeah, the big boss.
Congratulations, Phil. I mean, Sam. Oh, it's congratulations to Phil also.
Yeah. No more cease and desist letters.
What's that? Shh.
Yeah. Can you use one of those new buttons we found to dump what I just said? Right.
Got it.
Carlton, thanks for making it over the hill today, man.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
I know we've been talking about this for a long time, and I saw Maya yesterday, and she said, "Grill him, throw it down."
You know, it's if there's one thing you can cut on, it's your wife keeping you humble. A fantastic
Wait a minute.
job about it.
Yeah, so there's a ding on that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when your wife is Maya Dalla
Yeah.
the Dalla Vineyards,
Yeah.
I don't know. That she just have to try very hard to do that.
No, she doesn't. I live in a perpetual state between her and her mom of just being intimidated all the time, which I think is probably a good place for a husband to be.
Yeah.
With mother-in-law and wife.
Yeah, imbalance.
Yes, it does keep things in balance.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, you definitely are in trouble. All right.
I mean, my wife says it, so I don't have to. She loves her mom, but she loves her mom 463 miles away.
Yes, that's fair.
Close enough
Right.
you can get there, but
I believe Maya has the distinct privilege of working at her mom's house.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we've discovered.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming over from Napa. You came with some of the greatest names in the history of Napa Valley, in my mind.
Yeah.
And then the new brand that you've.
Yeah.
The Ingrade's what, 5 or 6 years since you.
I lose count. I think we're.
Although wait, it says established in 1873 on it.
So that was the vineyard, yeah. So the vineyard was first planted in 1873. It's an old ranch, but it really never. There was definitely no brand Ingrade, and the Heitz family, when they bought it in '89, they had the trademark to Ingrade, and never allowed anyone to use the trademark. So you didn't really see it on bottles very often.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But they sold almost all the fruit. Heitz never really worked with mountain fruit. They were really about benchland and valley floor. So they bought it and they planted it in 1990. So almost the entire ranch is all original plantings between 1990 and 92 roughly. There's a little Sauvignon Blanc from 96. And they would sell fruit, but they never allowed anyone to use the name. There was a random single vineyard bottling from like Baron and Hitchcock, I think.
That's random.
Yeah. But you never saw it single vineyard labeled. And what Heitz did was they would make like an Ingrade Zinfandel, but the Zinfandel didn't actually come from the ranch. You just have to, it's as you know, trademark law. You have to, it's like
Right,
use
you
it
have
or
to
lose it.
keep it alive.
So they always had like an in-grade Zinfandel that came predominantly from St. Helena.
And where exactly is the vineyard then?
So it's a pretty unique place because it sits up over the mountain and it's east facing. So you drive through Angwin,
Okay.
keep going back, and then you cut left on Ingrade Road, and you go sort of halfway down that road and it cuts into the vineyard.
Okay.
So the entire ranch is on the east facing side of the mountain, but it's a pretty wild ranch. So we've got all four aspects on the ranch. The property itself is almost 800 acres with about 200 planted. And it goes from 2,400 feet is the top elevation block all the way down to about 700 feet. It's a wild place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like
A big pain in the ass to farm,
Yeah.
to be very honest with you. Yeah.
we're used to that around here.
Yeah.
Yeah. We like the pain in the ass. The harder it is,
Dude, it's...
the more it's worth it, right? Well, some years. Some vintages.
I'd take it a bit easier.
Yeah.
You know, you want some struggle. I think that makes it interesting. I think great wines can often come from very difficult sites to farm, but this one is particularly very difficult. But it makes great wine, so that's the most important part.
Well, should we do a little bit of an intro?
Absolutely, because there was a whole life before Lawrence Wine Estates.
Right. So yeah, I mean, on top line, Carlton, you're the CEO of the three brands, or the whole the
So
Lawrence family. Napa.
So I co-founded Lawrence Wine Estates with the Lawrence family. So we own estates in Napa and in Bordeaux now. We started our venture with Heitz cellar, and then we purchased Stony Hill and Burgess, and then the Haynes Vineyard in Coombsville. And we developed the Ingrade brand from the Ingrade Ranch, which the Heitz family owned since the late 80s. We developed a new brand from the Haynes Vineyard in Coombsville, and then we just launched it's a very small project, a collaboration with Jeremy Sace from Domaine Dujac. And then in 22, we had the opportunity to buy Chateau Lescombe in Margaux. So that's been a whole new world for us, trying to...
Could you talk a little bit about how Lawrence's got into, what made them say we should go buy a winery in Napa Valley?
Well, that wasn't their initial intention. I became friends with the Lawrence family when I was in Aspen. They were guests of mine. I'd sold them wine. They became friends. And one of the daughters lived in St. Helena, moved to St. Helena, and they wanted to buy a small vineyard just to be close. It's a very close family. And that turned into a much bigger discussion once Heitz came to market. And, I'll give them credit. The Heitz family was pretty committed to having the winery stay in a family ownership versus PE money or, one of the big publicly traded companies.
Right.
And there were a lot of private families that were going to buy something, an estate like Heitz. Heitz, most people, they don't, it's not a massive brand, but they own a lot of vineyard.
Right.
And they farmed a lot of vineyard and sold fruit. So it was a pretty big acquisition. And so when it came on market, he called me, and I worked with him essentially just talking about what the value was of Heitz and what the potential was. And I wanted to make sure he didn't get screwed over, frankly. So I just did it as a friend. I sort of helped him with it, and that was it. It was a favor. And once he purchased it, we came to Napa together and drank some cool old wines from the library. It's one of the great benefits of buying old wineries is you buy the library, which is awesome. And that's when we started talking about me coming on board.
Okay.
I turned him down the first 2 times because I lived a pretty idealistic life in Aspen. I lived 3 blocks away from the gondola. I skied as much as I wanted. Only worked 9.
How many days a year?
It depends on the year.
Depends on how good the snow was.
That's actually the truth. You become a fair weather skier. I would only ski when there was snow and it was sunny, right? I mean, it's what you get used to. And when you don't pay to ski, you can just do that.
Right.
And but it was a great life. But finally, I said, it's this felt like a much bigger opportunity to do something that I could do for the rest of my life. And I knew I wasn't going to be in restaurants for the rest of my life. So we got here, and I think the work that we were initially doing with Heitz, people realized that we were not operating the same way big companies tend to operate when they buy these types of wineries. we actually reduced the production. We immediately converted all the vineyards, or went down the path of converting to biodynamics, and so we started getting calls from other family wineries. The Burgess family first, which I've always loved those old wines, and we were able to purchase that, and then the Haynes Vineyard, and then Stony Hill, and it just sort of became like our what we were passionate about, which is the historical style of wine and these historical vineyards of wine. It just became like what our company was, right? It's just sort of, there was no plan, right? And people don't believe me when I say that. There was no plan. It was just opportunities came, and we took advantage of them, and we grew really fast, which was difficult given that we were growing in the middle of COVID.
Right.
And we bought 2 wineries in 2020, one of which burned down pretty soon after we bought it. So that was a tough year, but our feeling was, if we can make it through this, then we'll be okay.
Right.
It just grew really fast. And I was really fortunate to be able to recruit really fantastic talent very early on. That was instrumental of sort of defining what's the future of these estates. It's you've got to have the right people who understand that. And I was just really blessed to get the right people on early on.
Awesome.
What should we try first?
We should probably start with Heitz. It's going to be probably the least tannic. The other two are mountain wines. So this is, we're just releasing the 19 single vineyards, because Heitz has a very long élevage. So this is the 21. We've just bottled this not too long ago, so I hope Brittany isn't going to be pissed at me, but should be fine. This is the 21.
We'll give it 17 seconds.
Yes.
It'll be fine.
So this is the 21, which is a vintage that I absolutely adore. I think this is when you look at all the little small tweaks we made at Heitz, and 21 was what I think was the culmination of all of them, and you really taste the purity in the wines. When we bought Heitz, we bought it because we love the wines, but as you know, no wine is perfect. So we sat down with Brittany. We had to have a very honest conversation, a vulnerable conversation of what's not great about these wines, right? What will we change? What will we evolve? And we sort of talked about some things that we like to do. And what I like about working with Brittany is she's really all about intention and not knee-jerk reaction, just doing things. And for us, we wanted to be more precise in the vineyard. Because Heitz was farming sort of they were in the 80s, early 90s. It was it wasn't super precision farming. Yields were a little bit too high, canopies were a bit too big and bushy, and that sort of thing. And it was systemic farming.
Those big 80s.
Yeah, but it also was systemic farming. It wasn't really farmed to the terroir. It was just, this is how we farm.
Right.
And so we wanted to dial that in. We started working with Pete over at Silverado, at Walsh, and those guys, and I really like them quite a bit. And we reduced the yields because we reduced the irrigation pretty dramatically. No more just systemic, just sort of tilling, just because everything was really intentional, had a purpose, and we saw a pretty dramatic. It was crazy to me how quickly vines respond to this sort of thing. People think it's going to take 10 years. It really doesn't. Within a couple of years, the vine really responds really well to it. And you just saw the whole structure, and Brittany had to sort of re-engineer how she was making the wines, because we know how the wines are made in the 70s. We really liked the wines, but just around Napa in general, they were very winemaker heavy, right? They were making wine, and we wanted to do less of that and put more effort in the vineyard. David Heitz liked oak a lot more than his dad did. So the only real change in the vinification was actually just in the élevage. He just increased the amount of new oak. So we dialed that back, got better cooperage, went back to more, sort of medium sized vessels, 1,500 to 2,000 liter Foudre, reduced the barrique, a little less new oak, and just got a purer wine. And 21 to me is where it sort of culminated into a really classical Rutherford.
So,
and this is from the Trail Side vineyard.
So
It's delicious.
I've not had a lot of Heitz wines, but something that I remember when I was beginning is people would always talk about Heitz. One of its trademarks was a mintiness. Would you concur with that?
Martha's vineyard, because Martha's on the eastern side of the vineyard. There's an entire line of eucalyptus trees.
Okay.
So that wine always by nature has various degrees of like that eucalypt. Some vintages is really intense. The only difference is just the vintage. I'm guessing like how hard the wind blows, but you know,
whether it was a good year for eucalyptus or not.
I guess.
Right,
I mean,
right.
some vintages
leaves
where
got in the
there's like
fermenter?
very little of that
Yeah.
personality. Sometimes it's really intense.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, Brittany is not a huge fan of that because winemakers obviously we want what's in the site, but I think that's part of the terroir of the place. It's almost
Right.
like the south of France where you have this garrigue like characteristic on the wine. I think it's
Right.
part of the place.
Right.
But this is Trailside. It's on the opposite side of the valley, on that alluvial fan, which is more volcanic than marine sedimentary.
Got it.
So very different profile.
Yeah.
Much more silky tannins, but you know, there's just more of a purity in the wines, less of that. There's no like oak floating on the wine.
Nope.
Heitz has always had a more restrained, more acidic profile. And that really it helps the polish wine because we do a much longer élevage. So at Heitz, we do a much colder fermentation. It's abnormally cold, but really traditional in the way that Heitz made wines. We never go past 75 degrees with fermentation for Cabernet.
Really?
Yeah. We drain the tank before it's completely dry. We finish the fermentation in these huge, like 60-year-old upright wood tanks.
Right.
The wine's dry. We splash rack it from one to another, get some oxygen, but they'll sit in those tanks for 9 months before we decide what vessel the élevage will be in, the long élevage. And that's a luxury because we don't have to order barrels until after harvest, so that we can taste and we get an idea of how many new barrels we actually need, and then we'll taste through, Brittany and I, all the lots, and then we decide what path they're going to go down. Is it going to be in this sort of realm of single vineyard quality or less than you want, or into our Napa cuvee? And they have very different élevage, different sizes and percentages of new and the whole thing. The Napa Valley cuvee, which I think is still one of the great values in Napa, is bottled after a little over 3 years. And the single vineyard wines are typically about 4 to 5, depending on the vintage.
You said
before
you
bottling.
this is the 21 and you just bottled it
Yeah.
months ago.
Yeah.
And in that extended time, excuse me, are you doing anything beyond typical maintaining barrels? I mean, topping, maintaining some sort of sulfur.
Yeah, I mean, I would say across the entire group, we make wines very naturally, but we're also not dogmatic about things like sulfur. Like sulfur is a tool that you use, and you should use it when you need it, not
Right.
when we don't do it systemically. It's not just like at this point we always just sulfur everything.
Right.
It's we're constantly doing analysis on every single lot and seeing what's needed, and if it needs it, we'll add it.
Yeah.
There's no, to me, it's just another tool.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering with longer than,
Yeah.
I'm using air quotes, typical time in barrique or, in élevage, are you doing anything different? I guess I was trying to...
extra.
Yeah.
Just more top offs, right? I mean,
No,
Well, yeah.
yeah, that's exactly it. You're just having to top up a lot more often.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just more work because it's over the course of up to 4
I just
yean
didn't know if you guys discovered something magical that you
No,
was
you
trying to
don't.
pry out of you.
Is it in caves? I mean, are you like do you have? I mean, that's what the thing would be. It was just a ton of evaporation, right?
Yeah,
But
no,
if you're in a
we
cave-
do get quite a bit of evaporation, and before they never measured it. We measure it now.
Right.
And it's interesting. It depends on what part of the cellar you're in.
Yeah.
The evaporation, or if you're in the bottom of the stack or the top.
Right.
It actually has a very big impact.
It is, and people
And,
don't want to think about that, I don't think.
Yeah, well, another thing that people don't consider is the increase in alcohol over such a long élevage. So we realized that, I recognize we were, because I look at all our chemistries, and we were barreling down at a certain alcohol, and then we were bottling. I'm like, what is going on here? So we looked at ways that we can change the humidity and so forth in the cellar, and the temperatures and so forth, to reduce that, so that we're getting closer to bottling at the alcohol that we barrel down on as much as possible.
Well, there's the way that you can get that's why I asked about the caves.
Yeah.
At Repris, one of the last, those caves are dug into straight rock. There's no reinforcement. There's no plaster, and the humidity stays really high in there, and they end up evaporating as much alcohol as water. So they don't necessarily alcohols don't raise during.
Yeah, we
elevage.
don't. We have, we still use the same building that Joe built in the 70s. And then we have a stone cellar, which is naturally more humid than the modern building that was built in the 1890s. We still make wine in. So I mean, it's just all over the place. So
Yeah.
we monitor it because we just want to know,
Right.
and it gives us guidance as to what we need to adjust to reduce the because there's also something that concentrates flavor, which that part we like, but it's we don't want the alcohols going up because I'm very sensitive. I'm a wuss when it comes to alcohol.
Okay.
So like in wine, tequila, no problem.
Right.
Wine,
Funny that.
But this is, it's a vineyard that Joe really loved. So the Trailside Vineyard used to be owned by Michael Robbins, who started Spring Mountain Winery
Okay.
in the 60s. This is the vineyard that he owned. It was about 180 acres, and it was called the Wildwood Ranch. So all the early Spring Mountain wines came from the Wildwood Ranch. And when he started to invest in vineyards actually on Spring Mountain, where his home was, he was very close friends with Joe. So he would sell Joe one little parcel at a time until Joe amassed about 89 acres. And then we were able to purchase the adjoining 40 acres, which was part of the original Wildwood Ranch from Treasury. So we now have almost 140 acres. It's a big ranch. But Trailside has always been from one single plot called Silverside, right on the slope, all volcanic sort of runoff in the mountains. And we've either declassed some of the other fruit into our Napa Cuvée, or we've always done big contracts with other wineries. We've always farmed and sold fruit.
There's still plenty of people buying Napa Valley Cabernet and
Yeah.
Cabernet.
Still,
I mean, in Napa.
still a thing. Turns
Oh,
out
a ton.
Still
Yeah.
Turns
Yeah.
out-
It's still a category.
it's not entirely recession proof, but it's
No.
as close as you can get.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's do now that we're in the middle of the show, biographical introduction portion. You that's the ink grade.
Carlton McCoy.
Boss man.
Phil's coming in
Phil
big
Cherry.
boss.
for the wine.
The big boss.
Matt Taylor makes that.
Yes, Matt, the great man, our gentle giant.
Oh, Matt.
Yeah, he makes it great.
He's making the so you got the liquid sky.
Yeah. So the world of wine gets to know you at Little Nell,
Yeah.
but you're originally a DC guy, or is that at least based on basically overhearing you and Conrad at the dinner?
Yeah,
in the Union Station?
my whole family's in DC. I have a pretty large family. Born and raised in DC. And,
Were they in politics? I mean,
No.
I hear from.
So I'm half black, half Jewish. My mom's family is from New York City. They're Russian, Hungarian Jews. My dad's African American. My dad's family moved north to escape racism in the South, and DC was just far north enough where you could get away from it. And there's also, Washington D.C. was, they call it Chocolate City for a reason. I mean, when I was a kid, it was probably 90% African American.
Right.
So it was a really, important black community in America. So my great grandmother had 12 children with her husband. They got married when they were really young. It was like a very old school Southern family, and each one of them, had 3 to 5 children. I have a massive family, and they're all in the DC area.
Okay.
So that was like my whole life. And when I was raised by my grandmother, and she was a really fantastic cook, and I was a weird kid that would prefer to be in the kitchen with my grandmother than like on a football field. And I learned how to cook from my grandmother. So I was really blessed to get a full scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America. And I took it very seriously. I was a cook for a number of years. And
What were some of those early things that she taught you that have stuck with you, or that really made an impression on you?
oh, of course. I mean, it was just, she was, black woman with a big family, so it was all like soul food.
Okay.
But very old school cooking. No recipes.
Right. No lacking of anything. No
Definitely
trying
not
to
flavor.
put something else in to make it healthier.
No,
she
none
just
of that.
cooked.
No,
Yeah.
no, we didn't do it.
Of course,
there was
yeah.
none of that
That's
going
good.
on. No. And I still cook that food once in a while, but I try to keep it to a minimum because it's like it's heavy. Yeah,
Hard on this lifestyle.
it's very hard on this lifestyle, but it's delicious.
Absolutely.
So I was in culinary school, and that was a whole different thing. It was, we obviously learned the cuisines of the world, but I really focused on. I loved very classical French cuisine, So I moved to New York City, and I was cooking there. And I got introduced to wine in college. It was this guy by the name of Steve Colpan. He was the wine instructor, and he was an awesome guy. He was this like Jewish hippie from upstate New York that was also a performance artist and became
Sounds like our kind of guy.
No, the guy was awesome, and he just really he was a wine instructor, but he really talked about the culture of wine. And its connection to food and its importance in society, and I connected to that. It wasn't just like wine facts, and I ended up going and spending a few weeks in Italy with him and a few other students on a scholarship, traveling around Italy, and he just had a huge impact on me because he was a true wine lover, and a perfect educator for college kids who were in culinary school who were just trying to survive the class and couldn't care less about wine other than just getting a good buzz, and I maintained a relationship with him after school. And then when I worked at Per Se, there was this server. His name was Raj Veja, who he now is. He ended up being the wine director for Daniel Blue's restaurant group, Indian guy. And I saw him walking around with wine books. And I said, "What are you doing with these wine books?" And he goes, "I study them." I said, "You just walk around with books, study them?" This is early internet days, so people still walked around with wine books, and I was, it just made an impact. I was like, there was a cool thing. He was already at the top of his career, and he was still like studying, and he used to introduce me to all these like tastings with the staff, because I was like a very low level, food runner server. I was fresh out of college, so no one took me very seriously. I was just like a grunt in the dining room sort of thing. And he would invite me to these tastings, and it sort of piqued my interest. And when I moved to DC, I needed to move back to my home for family reasons, for personal reasons, and I met this guy by the name of Andy Myers, who was the wine director of a restaurant called City's End in DC, and he was such an odd bird to be a sommelier, because I always thought of the sommelier as like the most polished guy, maybe a bit pretentious, that sort of thing.
Sure, especially of that era and where you were at.
Coming out of Per Se.
Yeah. Right. And Andy was a death metal drummer, like early punk rock days in DC. He used to be a bouncer at the 930 Club.
Great punk rock history in DC.
Yeah, no, big time. And his entire body's covered in tattoos. And I was like, that guy's the wine director? I just thought it was the craziest thing. And I connected with him, because he was this odd guy, and I like weird people, but he's a brilliant guy. And I remember I was like, hey, Andy, I really would like to learn about wine, and that punk rock mentality. He's like, yeah, you and everybody else, kid, And I go, okay. I said, well, what do I have to do? And he says, well, here are 5 books. You go read these books, and prove that you're going to really take it seriously. I said, okay. And he didn't hear me for a while, and I bought the books, and I read them all, and I came back, and I was like, hey, Andy, I just finished that last book. He goes, you read those books? I go, yeah. He goes, Carlton, those are reference books. They're not novels. And he goes, if you enjoy reading that, he goes, you'll be just fine. And he really took me under his wing. And
what were the 5 like reference books?
It was all the classics, like Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia.
Wonders of the World.
Yeah, like Hugh Johnson, like the Wine Atlas, like that sort of things. I mean, the real reference books.
Right.
But I just found them so intriguing. Right. And I used to sit in this Starbucks across from the Mandarin Oriental Hotel 4 hours before work, like reading these things. And he took me under his wing and brought me into like this tasting group. I didn't know what a master sommelier was, never heard of one. And he's like, look, I'm going to put you on this path. And it was the only reason I went down that path was he sort of guided me through, and we were doing blind tastings, 3 days a week, study groups. It was like I went like right into the deep end, and that just became my life. And I started being a full-time assistant sommelier under him.
So what year is this?
This is so I moved pretty quickly. I'm a pretty intense dude.
Yeah.
So I graduated from college in 2006. I was in New York for almost 2 years. Moved to DC in 2008.
Yeah.
And that's about when I moved to DC, and I took my intro exam maybe 6 months later. And between taking the introductory exam and passing the advanced exam was 18 months.
I mean, and that was the era where this was happening. Like,
yeah, big time.
It was people were going after this thing, and it was being acknowledged that if you had that, if you had that experience, if you went through that training, you could advance yourself in your career, right?
Yeah, because it's very intense. It's very difficult.
You were wanted men, people at that point.
And I think I was just so young, and I had no obligations outside of working and studying, that I was sort of naive. Like, I didn't even realize how difficult it was, and I was just like, sure, I'll try it. And I didn't overthink it, so I think that's why I did so well, moved and progressed so quickly.
Right.
Like, I had no children, I wasn't married, I had nothing. All I did was work and study. I had zero hobbies.
That was your hobby.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And it was my social circle.
Yeah.
If we were going out to dinner, I was going out with this group of Somms. Anything we did together. We studied together. I mean, it was it was pretty geeky. We were just in the middle of a concert, quiz each other on you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah.
That's how intense we were.
It's awesome.
And we had this awesome tasting group. This guy John Wayback, who I think is probably the greatest blind taster I've ever met. He was a chef, and he passed his advance and passed master's tasting 6 times. He couldn't get through service. He had no service experience. But he's the most brilliant blind taster I ever met in my life. He would host a tasting group at his house, and he had the craziest taste in music. He liked ska music and mariachi. So we
you know what? I'm going to give him that.
So we would go into his house, and there was 6 of us there, and he had this cat named Ben Casey that was so aggressive. Literally, you would be blind tasting, it would just claw at you, and he
No, it's not raspberry.
and he would be blasting either ska or mariachi at 10 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was a crazy environment to blind tasting and learn how to blind taste, but that was the culture, and you just dealt with it. And then we'd go out to lunch, and then come back, do another round of blind tasting, 2 in a day. It was very intense training. It was finished in school, and I'm very grateful for that community. It was a really odd community of people, because I think you got to be a little bit weird to try to be a master sommelier to begin with.
Yeah.
It's I've never met a normal master sommelier. I just haven't. It's a pretty odd. It just
do either one of you?
Yeah.
I know what mine was, but do either one of you remember that first time where you identified a flavor that you in a wine and you went, I know what that is?
Well, I remember the first time Andy brought me into blind tasting, which he sort of just threw me in the fire. I didn't know how to blind taste. I didn't know what it was about. I just started studying wine, and he's like, the first step of blind tasting is just smelling, tasting wine, and just writing down what you smell and taste with no guidance.
Free association.
Yeah, just here's a piece of paper.
Right.
Just write out everything you smell and taste. You don't need to know what the wines are. It's unimportant initially. It's familiar. Get your mind focused on just taking in data. And I remember the first wine he had me blind taste. This is, again, probably 2008. It was a 2005 Bruno Meyer Gruner Veltliner Lahm Vineyard, which is still one of the great Gruner Veltliners in Austria. And remember, I went to culinary school, so I had a bit of an advantage because that was what my whole world was, smelling and tasting.
Right.
And perceiving, balancing things. And I wrote it out, and it was a lot of what I came to find were really classic descriptors for Gruner Veltliner. And he was like, you do all right, kid. I was one of those kind of guys.
Right.
And it gave me the confidence, okay, I might be able to do this.
Right.
Yeah, because all those guys were a lot older than I was. I was probably 23 maybe. Yeah, when I first started.
Yeah.
I was like a kid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. My first harvest was 20, and I was probably 22 or 23 when I had that moment.
Yeah.
And my first thing I identified, I had things where you taste and someone go, they put out a descriptor, and I go, I get that now.
Sure.
But just purely my own thing, and it was Fruit Loops.
Fruit Loops.
And it was in a Sauvignon Blanc, and it was just that tropical fruit thing from Fruit Loops. And if you never ate Fruit Loops, Sam's kind of looking at me like, what the hell are Fruit Loops?
There was no Fruit Loops at 1600.
But that was
maybe.
it, and I was so proud of myself for that, and the people I was tasting with, they were older, and they were like, sure, whatever,
Yeah.
And so,
well, I think that's if a critique sort of sometimes the structured blind tasting system is that I think what I love about wine is everybody's experience with that wine is completely unique.
Yeah.
Given their life experience, And too often, that's why I hate tasty notes, is because it sort of it makes people feel like if you don't smell and taste this, then like you don't have a good palate, you don't have a good nose. So I'd rather just talk about how the wine is made, maybe like the weight and the structure and the body and these sort of things that are pretty much universal, and then let people have their own experience. Because it's like we were in these exams and they were saying words that I'm like, who in this room has ever had a boysenberry? Like, why are we saying these things? What if you're from like Southeast Asia? Like you're not going to smell boysenberry. I just think it's so irrelevant when we talk about wine. It's not irrelevant in the sense that a person you have your own experience. You smelled Fruit Loops. That's your experience. Right. That's not invalid, right? That's what you smell. Right. Like, it's totally like valid, right? But I think people try to impose these rules in it, and I don't know what drives that. Who reads like tasting notes?
I don't. I hate them.
Like when I talk about like descriptors, that part of the tasting note.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with you. When I first started and I started writing my first label copy for the back, and my wife was so adamant about what are the flavors, and I was like, I can't do this because I know what they are, but I can't force that upon anyone. Yeah. And now I'm on the back, and it's just information about the grapes, the wine, and that's it.
The only thing I can think is that probably like decades and decades ago, there were very limited demographics of people who drank wine. Absolutely. Who had very similar life experiences. Right. But now it's so global, I think it's now irrelevant.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point that you say. It was. That's part of the reason why we have a hard time getting people to drink wine, because we made it was so unapproachable at that point. And so you're right, the same demographics who ate the same things and drank this, and they drank the same things because there were only so many brands.
Yeah, and so many regions that were represented.
And so many regions, And now it's a world, and it's all right here.
Yeah, and it's changing all the time. I think people think if you're a master sommelier, like you, get this like global download of every wine ever produced, every vintage, and there's always so many new producers and regions that I'm like, I've studied that, never had a wine from there, and so it's by nature, it's meant to be humbling, right? By nature.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's go to the second wine.
Let's actually do maybe we go into Matt's wine, the ink grade.
Let the Stony Hill
we'll get
come out a little bit.
Talk about Matt a little bit, because I know the name, but I don't know him.
Yeah, so Matt Taylor. Matt is from West Sonoma Coast, and was a college football player. So naturally, he decided to go into winemaking, and he's a really talented guy.
He could lift the barrels.
Correct. Yeah. He's like, wow, strong labor. We'll take that.
Yeah, exactly.
And he worked at Joseph Swan, and then ended up in Burgundy, working with. This is back when Jacques Sayce was making the wine still, like 04, 05 at Dujac. And then he came back, and he was at Arajo, made the wines and did viticulture there for about 7 years, if I'm not mistaken. Cool. Went off on his own, did some consulting, and started his own brand, Matt Taylor Wines, which are really exceptional. And that's where I grabbed him, because I was looking for a winemaker that had experience in Napa, but wasn't necessarily like of the machine and could think outside of the box. And I met Matt, and I was just I was really impressed with him as a person.
Was that because, sorry to interrupt, but was that because of what ink grade was, or is that kind of your feeling in general? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I would say it's just my feeling in general. I'm a big believer that I like to work with people who are open-minded, want to explore different routes, and also, for me, the wines that we wanted to make were in a certain realm of structure. And we talk about preferences very different than quality, and I think people really get confused there. Just because you don't like something does not mean it's not high quality, right? There are wines that my friends make in Napa. They're not my favorite wines, but they're very high quality, right? But I knew like the realm of structure and weight and body that we wanted to play within, so we wanted to hire winemakers who were interested in doing that, right? And sometimes to get there, you've got to be really creative in viticulture and winemaking to take a different route than the traditional. Eat-Grade also is such a wild site that I was looking for someone who had viticultural experience, not just winemaking, because it's a really difficult vineyard to wrap your head around.
I mean, this is an incredible location.
Yeah, it is, and it's very unique, because most vineyards in Hell Mountain either sit on the top of the mountain or are west facing.
Right.
And this is east facing. It has a completely different weather pattern than the
Yeah,
Of
but we have to
course.
interrupt into a microphone though.
yeah.
You can't just interrupt into the ether.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Phil Wenty,
Oh
Carlton.
wow, how are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
Nikki
Pleasure.
Wenty.
Hi.
She has
Nice to
a,
meet
one of
you.
those Italian
Hi.
last names I can never
Yeah.
pronounce.
Fantastic, honor to meet you.
We're
Unavoidable.
talking Wenty clothes all day.
Yeah, we have. We actually
We have not actually.
No.
But
we
Future
actually
podcast
have,
guests Phil and Nikki Wenty here.
No, I tell you,
Hello.
so we have we own the Haynes Vineyard in Coombsville that has the Winty clone planted in the 60s.
Oh,
well,
nice.
those are some nice old vines.
Yeah, no, and the wines are absolutely exceptional. I have a bottle here. I'm supposed to bring it to dinner, but I'd rather you have it.
No. I couldn't do
I
that.
actually would prefer you have it because it's way more important. I mean, how cool that would be, right? Hey, 1 second. Sorry, podcasters.
That's right.
This interruption brought to you by original Wenty clone Chardonnay. Not berry at all.
There we go.
There's a whole
Great
podcast in
Wendy
that.
Clone Chardonnay.
Yeah. Here you go.
That's cool.
Oh, look at
wait,
this.
you guys hold that bottle.
Wow.
You guys stand there and hold that bottle up.
Yeah.
Get over there, Carl.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right. So, well, this will be on Instagram when you're wondering why nobody's talking right now.
No, I mean, what an honor, huh?
That's
Wow,
cool.
no, this is an honor.
Yeah.
Here we go. Hames Vineyard, Coombsville.
Yeah.
I'm going to make him drink it with me.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Better.
Wow.
Oh, that was fantastic.
I'm
I'm
deeply
glad I
Love
got
that
honored.
timing.
Yeah.
Love that.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Sorry if we were
interrupting you guys.
interrupting
No,
over
no,
here
no.
our
I'll walk
conversation.
over.
Sam,
It's nice to see you, Phil.
good to
Good
see
to see
you.
you,
See you,
Sam.
Nikki.
Thank you all. Honor to meet you all.
Yeah, great to meet you guys.
Thank you.
I'm like totally obsessed with the Winty clone in California. Like it's, as far as my taste, I think it's my favorite clone of Chardonnay in
Absolutely.
California. And it's what makes those wines great. It's obviously the vines are old, but that clone is just. And it's a geeky thing to talk about, but wow, that was cool.
Yeah.
Well, we have some new Wenty clone
Yeah.
Chardonnay going in. That was part
Yeah.
of what today was a little like Budwood for Vineyard Tour trade. You know, they're apparently they have a bunch of vineyards CCOF certified, but are looking to step up their farming game a little bit. And,
Awesome.
Came and played with tractors and stuff that we got out there for weed control and things like that.
What a legendary name.
No,
huh?
totally right. I mean, one of
Yeah.
talk about legendary family-owned
Yeah, it's
California winery.
Yeah. So back to here as well. And what I was saying is the weather patterns are different.
Back to
So Ingrate doesn't have the same downhill shift that you have in the Napa Valley proper. So it's our last vineyard to really start going. It's much colder in the spring, but then it warms up, and you don't have those massive temperature swings that you have on the other side of the valley. It's much more consistent day to night, so it sort of catches up, and it's similar. It reminds me a lot of like Montebello, where it's like it's cold, and then it gets warm, and it's sort of the nights are almost similar to daytime, and it catches up. So our first viticulturist we worked with was had actually worked at Ridge, and I hired him because of that, so we can wrap our head around Ingrate. And then Matt came in, and he's a really brilliant guy, and he was really adamant about, and we figured out how to do it of fermenting all of these different blocks separately, because when you have a site that spans that wide a range of elevation and soil types and aspects, and we sort of just monitored it and kept tasting through year after year until 22 we started bottling some of the climats separate. We still do a blended Hell Mountain, but like the blocks that just sing in those years, we'll bottle separately. And it may not be the same ones every year, but it's he killed. I mean, this is 22, and if you taste, these are really fresh wines.
Yeah, super fresh.
It's delicious.
So we do a longer élevage, but we don't use a lot of barrique or new oak. It's predominantly Foudre for about 30 months. So you're not getting like a prominent oak characteristic, but it helps to polish the tannins. It's a very tannic site.
I mean, it has that mountain fruit structure for sure. That needs a little love.
But the wines come out super aromatic, and that's what I love. I mean, I'm a Burgundy freak, so for me, aromatics are just as important as flavor and structure. I want to be able to smell the glass, and every time I smell the glass, get something really explosive but still fresh.
Right.
And this site holds acid really well, which is critical for me.
I also find it, hearing you say this, and it's something that probably a lot of our listeners don't understand, is that there's been a major shift in what wine is stored in the last, can we say 15 years?
Sure.
I don't think any more than 20.
Yeah,
Like,
probably even less than that.
Where
Yeah.
it was always 60-gallon barriques.
Classic barrels.
Classic barrels.
The ones
Yeah.
that you buy a half of at Home Depot
Correct.
to put your plants in.
And the change, and that's not even talking about amphoras and concrete tanks and whatnot, but just in barrels. Like Barrel Salesman, the catalog has tripled in size because
I agree.
there's so many things available.
Well, I think it's more of I think there may have been a more of a systemic approach that this is just what you do, and I think
Right.
also in our region there was a lot of what I feel is like an inferiority complex of Bordeaux for many years. So it was just sort of like if you emulated what happened with Bordeaux, you would be okay. So it was VSP close to the ground. This is how you put it in a small barrel. These are the Cooper. That sort of thing. I think the next generation was much more worldly in their approach, and it's just sort of the vessel should match the wine.
Well, I think
is
the other
really
thing
what-
that, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
the other thing that is so much part of that is go around and interview winemakers now and find one that's never worked internationally.
Sure. No,
It's
I agree.
almost doesn't happen. And of the era of the 80s and 90s where most people hadn't.
Yeah.
And if you had, you were kind of looked as a just floating around. And now I'm sure if you got a resume from someone that had no international experience, you would probably wonder why not.
Probably at this point. I
don't mean to.
Well, no, what I would say is it doesn't mean that you would necessarily be a better winemaker. I think it just helps to open your mind to what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And I know people don't like to admit it, but things like social media have changed because now you have access to know what wineries are doing around the world.
Right.
And you can see and you can go, oh, I want to experiment with that. I want to play with that. I wonder what the impact of that is. You buy the wine, you try it. And so I just think younger winemakers are just more exposed to the world of wine and things that were, I think, sort of siloed, not intentionally, but regionally, that maybe, in California we weren't experimenting with as much. Now we are.
Yeah.
And in many ways, there's some things that we're much more advanced with in California, maybe because just legally and also, I think, culture, we're more likely to take risk and experiment with things than maybe some European regions are.
Yeah.
There's less rules. I just love how, obviously it's different vineyards, different wineries. But, in the world of wine, people think now Heitz and Great are sort of lumped together in their brain. These are drastically different wines.
Oh, very. So that was important for us. I mean, I said to the family from the beginning, I was like, I didn't see much value in creating another brand or estate unless it was truly very unique. And the only way to do that is to have, you don't necessarily need one winemaker per project, but I didn't want a house style. I felt that to be really boring and not true to the places. If we're making wines, Incrate comes from a very unique place, in the valley and on the planet, right? So we need someone that was willing to hyper focus on that, to discover what that meant for us as far as a brand and how we're going to express that. Stony Hill, Haynes, the Trailside Estate, they come from places. So if you have, and winemakers are just humans, they have a preference. So after a certain point, you're going to find maybe too much of a common thread between all the wines that, for me, I found to be an approach that was uninteresting. So we needed winemakers that had their own approach and their own preference. And they're all very talented in their own right. And I've been really fortunate, even the winemakers that aren't in our company anymore, to work with them and learn from them because they make really exceptional wines. But it really helped us to figure out what we're going to be doing with each estate. And Incrate, to me, it's such a unique site that it's almost really hard to compare to other even High Mountain sites because it's on High Mountain, but it's completely different at the same time. Right. And so we couldn't chase what other people were doing in High Mountain. We're like, okay, well, we need to find out what this site is going to do. Right. Again, back to that non-systemic approach. I could have said, hey, you're going to taste these wines. These are the target. Make them like this. Right. It was more of let's try a bunch of things, and then we'll taste through and define what we think is the most balanced wine. Because I think the more balanced the wine is, the more true it is to express in the place, just by nature. And the first part of that's locking in farming, in my opinion, which is such a big ranch, is that was a huge undertaking.
The farming at the bottom of the hill is way different than the farming at the top of the hill.
Oh, it's like different appellations. It's like it's nuts.
We said 700 to 20 something.
2,400. The top block is we actually have Merlot and a little Cabernet Franc up at 2,400 feet.
That's a big swing. Yeah. To me, it has more in common with Moon Mountain District Cabernet than anything Howell Mountain, or it has that like that irony, that almost sort of bloody red brightness.
Right. Yeah, because you have up there the bright red sort of Aiken soils. Right. You also have some of the tuff, which is that compressed volcanic ash.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all over the place. It's not like you just have it in this part and then over here you have tuff. It's intertwined throughout. But you really do get that sort of, they call it like, the French call it like the sanguine like characteristic to it.
Right.
But
there we go.
like
look, I had a tasting note.
Like
look
that?
at me.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Just 700 books to go. I should see somebody.
You should write that down.
No, I mean, I don't even know what studying for exams are going to be worth now that you have ChatGPT.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at them when I didn't have ChatGPT. I don't know if I'll be any better.
Yeah, but he just nailed it. So I always say is like I don't personally enjoy like really 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 massive wines, but I equally dislike anemic wines because I think they're one and the same, in my opinion. And I think there's a really nice wide gap in the middle where you can play within. And it depends on your site what you're going to produce. I think trying to produce just really light wines in a site that's sun exposed and very hot and very warm, it doesn't. You can't make great wine that way because it's not what the site wants to do. Right. The same way people have tried to force that style on really cold sites, and you can taste it just doesn't taste balanced. It doesn't taste true to what it is. It's you don't get the complexity. Texturally, you don't get the mid palate. That's what we're looking for, and it takes years of. We're still, I think there's so much pressure for people to say they have things figured out, and I'm the first to say like we don't have it figured out. We're still trialing things all the time to try to learn because I came from the sommelier side of the world, so there's a big steep learning curve for me on like viticulture and actual winemaking, not like theory of viticulture winemaking, how it actually
the
works.
Fresno versus Davis
concept.
It's
it's like what actually works and like how it works. But I think because we have sites all over the valley, and I got to work with 5-6 winemakers at a time, it was like really rapid pace. Every harvest was like 5 harvests. Wow. And I was learning a lot, and they all come with different experience sets and backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time with some of the old timers, which I really valued at that time. Yeah. And you just sort of like rapid pace learning, but we're still very much in like infancy in what we're doing as a company.
So what does harvest look like for you? What do you get to do, and what do you have to do?
I would say it's different now. I think in the beginning, because I was sort of insecure of like, okay, well, I need to learn a lot really, really fast. So like the team will respect my opinion. I think that what I didn't realize in the beginning, what I brought was a lot of value of an understanding of the end result and structure and understanding what great wine was and working backwards. And it was their job to help us get there.
Right.
And I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off the first couple of years because I felt like I like needed to be at every pick and every one. And it was just a madhouse. But I also realized that I was nagging the hell out of the winemakers. And if we had done our jobs properly, I didn't need to really be involved. So now I sort of have a much more lax approach. I've learned a lot as well over the last 6 years. Where I sort of back off. No one wants a guy like me hovering over there fermenter.
Here comes the CEO.
Yeah, right.
Put the beer away.
Yeah, no one wants that guy.
They go up on the catwalk and his head's in the tank, and they're like, "It smelled good this morning."
No, so what I'm doing is it's like I'm going around tasting like every day from one wine or other, like just learning.
Yeah.
And I'm asking questions and tasting that sort of thing. Sometimes they need someone to bounce ideas off of. That and we talked throughout the entire year things that we want to evolve for the next year, and we keep track of that. So it's like, all right, can we the harvest is the vintage changes, so sometimes you can't do what you want to do because the vintage doesn't let you, but you try to like track those things that you really want to change and get the wines where you want them to be. And like my goal is just don't annoy the winemakers as much as possible.
Is it possible?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
At least they
especially
tell me.
that time of year.
The vineyard pests.
I think they're being kind and saying, no, it's fine. And you get that. Yeah. I did go up once because I said, Maya, she had to go back up to the winery to do a pump over. I was like, you need help. And she's like, help with what? I said, like, you want to do pump over? She's like, well, sure, you can come with me. And Maya and I keep our like professional and personal life very separate. And
she doesn't let you wash hoses or anything?
No, I literally said to her, I was like, I've never done a pump over. I was like pumped about it. No pun intended. And I go up And I started doing the pump over, and someone texted me. I looked down, and there's like wine going everywhere. And she's just like, no. She's like, get down. You're done. It's like, that's your last pump over. I was so ashamed.
You're half an hour as an intern at Dalla Valle.
Well, also because, like, I mean,
At least you were in the right tank.
Well, you guys know how this works. There's obviously we're different people, obviously, in some degree with our partners in our work. And Maya's a very intense individual. She's very talented. And it was like, no, it was work time. She's a very intense person.
Yeah.
And she's a perfectionist. Yeah. And, you know, I didn't cut the mustard. You know, clearly. So,
that's why I'm not in bond trading.
Wait for me at home.
Yeah, pretty much. Go get the dogs and
exactly.
Get back on the bench.
Go feed the corgis.
Yeah, pretty much. That's about as useful as I am now.
I kind of want to ask about the challenge of your learning curve and basically at running a startup at the same time as stewarding and being the caretaker for these like some of the most important brands in the history of Napa Valley. I know that's one of, and that must, you know, keep you up at night and make you want to look at your phone while you're doing pump overs.
No, always. I mean, is my position is pretty unique because I never aspired to be like a desk CEO that would just sit at a desk and run numbers. I just would never want to do that for a living. So I'm involved at every layer of our company. And part of it is also recognizing that you never stop learning, and I want to continue to learn as my team learns. But it was a lot. I mean, we grew really fast. You have to remember, I'd never run a winery before in my life, so I had to learn a lot really fast. And I was really fortunate that people were pretty generous with knowledge, and I just ignored a lot of people, asking them up for drinks, asking them what, you know, they probably thought were stupid questions, but it was all new to me. And, you know, you just sort of like, you know, you become a sponge. And for me, it was really, really invigorating. It reminded me of like when I first started learning about wine. Like I would get so pumped, and I was up reading things at night, you know, but I've always been a really intense guy. I work a lot. I have no problem working an enormous amount. So I don't sleep a whole lot, and I just grinded it out. I mean, I don't think I took a vacation for the first 4 years of this. And I've only taken 2 vacations in 6 years. Because I love what I do, and I do feel an obligation, given the estates and vineyards that we have, and to our teams to, you know, to offer an enormous amount of personal sacrifice to be successful. But it's also like, you know, when you're running historical estates, it does drive you to sort of feel a bit insignificant, because, you know, you're just sort of like, you're just running this era, and then you're going to die and some other person's going to do it, you know, especially when you're looking at vineyards that were planted, you know, 150 years ago. You're like, okay, so like my little window is pretty insignificant. Right. But you feel an obligation to respect the work that was done before. And you look at Burgess, and you have Bill Sorensen, who made those wines for over 40 years, right? It's like you don't want to screw that up, right? And, you know, obviously Stony Hill going back to the 40s, you don't want to be the person to screw that up. And it's for me, I always felt that, especially our historical estates that already have brands, is I was never also going to be in the business of strictly like running like a museum where you just felt this pressure to never change anything. Right. And we had to make that decision pretty early on, because there was so much pressure of, I don't know, if you change anything, you're ruining it. And I think that's wrong. I think the best way to think about it is, if those people were still alive and really ambitious, what would they be doing to make things better, right? That to me is actually our job. If we're just doing the same thing that, you know, the McRae's were doing in the 90s, then I don't think we've contributed anything, right? We're maintainers, right? It's like a government worker, right? It's like, no, like, what can we do better, right? Let's do that, right? Because it's better. As long as we're making, you know, balanced wines that are age-worthy, that honor the place, doing things the best we can. Like, we're humans, we're going to make mistakes, you know, every day. But that intention is really important, and it does. It comes with, especially being so young, like running and starting all that. It comes with a lot of pressure. And I was also an outsider. You know, I came from the outside of Napa Valley. I'm, believe it or not, like not a super social person. So I just work, and I go home to my wife and my dogs. And I think that maybe sometimes that came off as like pretension, when in reality I was just like in the weeds. Yeah. I didn't have time, you know, like a lot of people I knew in the Napa Valley, I didn't see them for years after I moved here. Right. I saw them more when I was living in Aspen, you know.
Oh, they came to you when you were in Aspen too.
Yeah, it was much easier. But I was just so hyper focused on the work, and obviously the financial side of the business, and building teams, and, sales and everything else. It's a lot when you're growing so fast.
Well, and there are a whole bunch of established brands that, whether they've been passed on to new ownership or stayed in that same ownership, that haven't evolved and have just, not wanted to break what they already have and, maintain it as a library. And they're all suffering, right? Or they're just what they are. There's all three of these brands have, huge life to them and interest and draw because of the process that you've gone through.
Well, I don't take it for granted. I and I say this all the time. The work is so humbling, and and I speak for my team. Like, we really feel really honored to be able to take over these estates, and sometimes it's a bit surreal. And I think the winemakers especially feel a really serious obligation. And we talk about it all the time, and we're very much like, in that bubble together. Like trying to learn together. We've got Macy, who oversees our viticulture. She's like the sweetest person and super knowledgeable, and we've got this really fantastic team. And we also have, again, winemakers who aren't with the company anymore, who offered like tremendous contribution. And I've never been this person who, I had bad experiences when I worked in restaurants where I would leave a restaurant and whoever ran the restaurant owner would make me feel horrible. Because I left. I don't feel that way. Like, I'm just really grateful for when you're here, if you're focused and you're doing great work. That's all I can. That's all I can ask for, right? And I'm really grateful for that. We had Jamie Motley making the wines initially at Stony Hill. She did a great job. Nico worked with us for a number of years. He did great work. Megan now, head winemaker of Opus One. She did 4
Friend of the pod.
Yeah, she did 4 vintages at Burgess, and those wines are insane, right? So it's I think we're we do have team members that are there for a season. Brittany's been with Heitz since 2012, and evolved everything from there. But it's like the people, when you're in the company, you have to create an environment where you work really intensely. That's the one thing I think I brought with me from the restaurants, is a very, very intense work environment. And that's tough for some people, and some people come in and they go, it's really cool what they're doing, until they see how we work, and they go, all right, get the hell out of here. Right. There are a few months they're like, love what you guys are doing, but that doesn't fit my goals for my life, and I get that. But we're just that's just the company tone. We're just very intense people. Yeah.
You got they're intense wines to be making and thinking about all the time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Could we talk a little bit about the history of Stony Hill? Because, obviously, Heitz Martha's Vineyard is one of the exalted, Judgment of Paris, one of the most important wines of the world. The Heitz cellars, people know about that. I feel like Stony Hill, and I almost told you just to bring it, some of the Riesling.
I should have.
What, like a case?
Yeah, at least, for starters.
From the library.
But it's, through sort of its history, always been a little bit under the radar, a little bit overlooked, and kind of hidden up there in the mountains, and I think needs and deserves the spotlight that you guys are giving it now.
Yeah, so Stony Hill was an estate that was developed by the McCray family. They found the property and started planting it in 1948, 1949, and Fred McCray was an advertising and marketing business in the city, sold his company, moved up north. And the initial thing they planted actually was just because it was a very different day in Napa. You could just plant what you wanted and what you liked.
You still can,
not if you want to stay in business.
Great Grenache in Oakville. I don't know if you've heard.
I hear Chenin Blanc's on its way back.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope so, because Chenin Blanc has a big history in Napa.
Yes.
And they planted Alsatian varietals, because they really like Alsatian wine. So it was Riesling, Gewürztraminer, and Pinot Blanc. And they planted Chardonnay because they like white Burgundy. And they sort of maintained those varietals for a while. They eventually planted some Zinfandel and some Pinot Noir. Never went to market. We read these incredible interviews done by Eleanor McCray. And they go, well, what happened to the Zinfandel and the Pinot? She goes, I never saw a bottle sold. She goes, but I think Fred and Mike drank most of it with their friends. Yeah, it was never really bottled. They may want something called like Fred's Red for a few years. And then I think in 2008, they planted Bordeaux varietals. They had planted Syrah in the late 90s. Then Border Varieties got planted in like 08, 09. So they've always sort of planted it all. Most people didn't know that they produced red wine because they sold it all direct. So, with Fred being in ad and marketing business, he recognized the value of communicating directly with the buyer. So he was the first winery in Napa to have like a really structured mailing list. And we still have the original mailing list on like index cards and one of those like Rolodex.
Do you really?
It's the coolest
That's
thing.
awesome.
Yeah.
So most of their wine was sold direct, so it never really went to out in the market. So unless you were a Somm or a geeky California collector, you really never saw them out in the market. So we made a really big commitment early on, which is like, no, we need these wines in restaurants, right? So we reduced some allocations, like the exact opposite of what most people do in wineries. And we put Cabernet out in the market and things like that, so that the wine world would actually know that we actually we made red wine. Because I think
See you in August.
I think the first time that we the team had posted something about one of the blocks that we had to replant, which was Cabernet Sauvignon, by the way. Everyone was up in arms, like, they're ripping out everything, planting Cabernet. It's like, well, no, they've had Cabernet up there for a very long time, and Syrah and Pinot, but no one knew about
Right,
it.
it was all of the whites.
We another thing people don't realize about Stony Hill is Fred died fairly early on, and Eleanor really ran the estate, and she never really gets credit for it. Eleanor McCoy was a beast. I mean, you think of as being a woman running an estate like that in Napa during that time was a very male-dominated industry, and Mike Collini was the winemaker there for 42 harvests. So it was really Mike and Eleanor that carried it through and really built it to what it is. So we're working with the family right now to actually have a wine, a permanent SKU that really honors her and tells her story. That's cool. A lot of people know Fred McRae, a lot of people know Mike Collini, but very few people have ever even heard of Eleanor. And she's really the person who ran the estate. So we want to honor Eleanor, which is a pretty legendary woman. And the family's obviously very excited about that and really supportive. But we... that site goes from 600 feet to about 2,200 feet. And
you like these challenges, don't you, Carlton?
As my wife says, she's like, Carlton, you like intentionally make your life very difficult, don't you?
You have a good ATV at least?
Yeah. I was like, yeah, it'll make for a great biography one day. And so the soils there are predominantly shale and sandstone, like a lot of Spring Mountain. But at the very, very top, you have to actually drive through the Botham State Park to get to the top block. And it's all like iron-rich volcanic soils. It's completely polar opposite. It's actually similar to the soils you would see on like Howe Mountain, right. And it's really oddball like block right at the top of the mountain. It's bright red. So we said, there's dramatic geological differences here. So we hired Xavier Chaunet, who we were working with him at Chateau Lascombe. They call him the terroir whisperer in Bordeaux, which I think is the funniest thing.
And business guide.
Yeah. So he came out and did the soil analysis and I love that. And he like confirmed that. So we started to ferment and age these things separately to different climats. And then working with Reed, who I love working with.
Yeah, another friend of the pod.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted Brian at, because Brian is such a
Reed fan,
Reed groupie, and loves
Reed's awesome.
And the Tidings wines, I think Brian was the first and last, bought all of them.
Well, I met Reed actually when he was working at Della Valle.
Okay.
That's how I met him, and I was just really impressed with like his approach, his philosophy behind things. Then I tasted his wine, and I was like, okay, great. He's not allowed to talk. He knows how to make wine as well, and he just. I know it sounds bad. I look at the technical. Obviously, you have to be able to make the kind of wine we want to make and to have knowledge. But I also, it's really important, like the energy of a person that you feel of. And I loved his energy. Mm-hmm. And so I just, Jamie was moving on from Stony Hill, and I was like, would you be interested? And at the time, he was with McDonald's, so we wanted to make sure that they were in the loop because they're close friends, and I wasn't going to screw that up. And it says so much about him. They were pumped for the opportunity for him. And man, he has done such an exceptional job. He's such a talent. He's so knowledgeable, and I learned so much from him. Like my conversations with him, I just walk away like just empowered and like super excited.
I completely agree.
Totally.
If you should listen to our
I was going to say, I'm going to send you the
him
links
sometime.
I will.
Because,
he's mad knowledge drop.
And the thing about it is with him is he has that intensity that you were describing, I think, but he has this calmness and this like zenness or balance.
Totally.
That's totally opposite
Yeah.
of what that should be, right?
Well, also you judge some people by
It's the energy of Stony Hill. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know Jamie
Right.
Motley at all or very well anyway. But it like when I think of Stony Hill, and then you think of Reed, and I'm like, yeah, that's just like a perfect fit.
Yeah, and he takes his work really seriously. And I always say you also judge someone by the partner that they choose, and he's got the most awesome wife,
Aaron, shout out Aaron.
She's awesome.
She used to
we love
torment
hanging out
me in
with her.
sixth grade.
She's fantastic.
Bless
And,
her.
no, but and for me, it's like, I talk to people and they like, so what are you doing? I go, well, just to be clear, like I don't make wine. I actually have no aspirations to make wine. And I don't farm vineyards. I never have. It's my job to have an understanding of it, to be able to support my team in their decisions, and sometimes to challenge the decisions is really what it's about. And also put my energy on what I know is that we're judged by what we put in the bottle, not a philosophy that we talk about on Instagram. Right? So I don't get caught up in the fluff at all. Like people drink wine, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell people, I said, 95% of the people who ever drink your wine won't ever see any of this. They'll just open the bottle and they'll drink the wine, and that's going to be the only thing that matters to them. So the wine has to be really good, right? And that's what I'm always. That's my barrier. Is like we can't allow ideology and philosophies to get in the way of making a great wine ever. And Reed gets that, and the conversations is so easy. He's open to critique. And that's really hard with artists. It's like we're dealing with chefs. Like back in my restaurant days, it's like really hard to critique chefs. Sometimes really hard to critique winemakers. They don't want to hear it. And I understand why, because they're artists, right? But it's really my job to ensure that what we're putting out in the world is what we intend it to, and that the quality is there. It has to be, right? The wines have to be great. It just we can't, especially we're early on. I think there's no margin for mediocrity. It's just not the way I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's solid.
I mean, you're also like, to go back to the conversation of how you handle having these historic brands, is there's no room for mediocrity at Stony Hill or Heitz, no matter who's in charge or who's making the wine, right? I mean,
no, 100%. And maybe it's my own thing. I just felt because I wasn't from the side of the industry, there was a bit of like, who the hell is that guy think he is, sort of thing. And I still deal with a lot of that. But my answer to that has always been like what I've done my whole life.
It sounds like a Couturier child coming.
Yeah, right?
It certainly does.
My answer to that has always been just like put your head down and do your work and let your work speak for you, and just be kind to people. And that's what I try to do. And it's been my answer throughout my entire life, because I've always been like the youngest to do something. I was just really like a nutso kid who just always was really aggressive in doing things. So I've always been critiqued, and I'm okay with it. Actually, sometimes there's truth in the critiques. But I just think it's like you just focus on your work, and if we can continue to make great wines, be really kind to people, and like have an awesome team, and pay them well, and support them, and then the end, the sort of rumor mill and so forth won't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
So, two things that I'd like you to touch base on. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an update on everything with? I just drew a blank on the nonprofit.
Oh, Roots Fund.
Roots Fund.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then
That
also
was on my list of things that we were supposed to ask about.
and then also, can we talk about your TV show?
Sure.
Your short-lived TV show, but
Yeah.
I watched it.
More episodes of a TV show than either of us have.
No, I watched.
Yeah.
I watched them, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. So I guess
Thank
I
you.
wanted to say thank you
you.
because I enjoyed them.
Thank you. So the Roots Fund. So the Roots Fund is alive and kicking. We're doing well and trying to navigate the politicized angle of anything that focuses on diversity. We were never that type of organization anyway. It was really preachy about things. Like I'm a big believer in community, and I've been so fortunate because I come from a really impoverished environment that I'm only here because other people saw potential in me and gave me opportunities, right? I had to do the work, but they opened the doors and gave me opportunities. And for me, the food and beverage industry has made my life so much richer that I want that for other people who don't have access, right? And I I don't think that should be a political statement.
Yeah.
Somehow it turns into that. It's just like a human thing and a desire of myself to try to contribute to other people in a way that people are sort of fed into my life, and that's just what we do. We raise funds to give people opportunities that they don't typically have, and sometimes it's not even about funding. We just connect them to people, right? We have some of our candidates where they don't need scholarships. What they need is like introductions and access. So that's like 80% of what we do.
Yeah.
They don't need scholarships. They don't. So we're going, hey, let me introduce you to this guy. And I'll put you in the room with them, and using those connections to give them a path, right, and mentorship. And I think that's really important. And that work continues. Akimi DeBose is our executive director, and she's a machine. She's
awesome.
Oh yeah, she's a rock star, and she really cares about the work. And I don't think you can do that work long term if you don't really genuinely care about it. So Akimi and I came from the same scholarship program, so I've known her since I was 18.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But no, it's been really fulfilling, and it takes a little while to see the results of the work. But now we're seeing some of those like scholars like have like serious careers. Like we have one of our first scholars, Darren. He was a line cook in South Carolina and got laid off because of COVID. And he sent me a DM like, hey, I took like an intro course. I'm a cook, but I took an intro course very interested in wine. Like I would love some advice on like what path I should go down. And I said, sure. I got on the phone with him and said, are you interested in winemaking or not? And he's like, as a cook, I really like working with my hands. I'd like to go into winemaking. So I said, we're looking for some interns here in Napa. I'll connect you with the winemakers, but I'm a big believer. I won't get you the job. I'll get you in the room and help you prepare, but you've got to represent yourself. And he ended up working actually with Nico for a few years. Then ended up in Burgundy, and then worked in Barolo, and then worked in New Zealand, and now is cellar master at Domaine Drouin in Oregon.
Yeah.
And this is like 4 years later.
Yeah.
And the guy, and to me, it's like that's fulfilling. It's like, we talk about giving back, and that was it's like the results of what you change someone's life, and potentially like break a generational curse. And as ambitious as I am, I also realize that you can't change the world, but you could have an impact on your little world around you as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that's been really fulfilling, and just to see the work come to fruition as far as changing people's careers.
Yeah.
So the TV show.
Well,
So
before you, I want to give more credit.
Congratulations, and good on you for
somebody, and Bart can speak to this too. Spent literally my entire life in this business.
Yeah.
It is easily becomes an echo chamber, and when you're going to hire somebody new, you look around town because
of course
that's where you look.
It's convenient.
And so just giving people access who didn't grow up here or didn't have a family in wine or a family that drank wine but have an interest is so important to bringing new voices into these rooms, into these tables.
Well, especially also as a country, if we want more people drinking wine, we got to get more people involved in wine. And sometimes we just do educational stuff to try to recruit new scholars, and maybe we get one or two, but the rest of them have all interacted with wine, and they're probably much more excited about drinking wine as a consumer, right? It's just we just have to get ourselves out there as an industry much more, and sort of open the iron cage to the golden cage, let people in. But yeah, so Akimi keeps me on the straight and narrow as much as she can.
awesome.
That's a tough one. Okay. And then very quickly about the TV show, I had no aspirations to ever be on television. I'll start with that.
You don't. I mean, we knew the show before we necessarily knew you.
Right.
Yeah.
I might be able to being able to tell that.
On definitely like not your personality or
it just
work ethic at all.
No, it just came as an opportunity, and I've just sort of had this philosophy of like, why not?
Yeah.
And I was like, that'll be cool. That's literally all I thought, and it turned into something much bigger. We filmed a second season, and I'll tell you what was uniquely fantastic about it was the timing, because we filmed it right after COVID, where we were all just like stuffed up in our houses for a long time and couldn't travel. And here I am now, I get to go to this show where CNN pays me to go wherever I want in the world, and they organize everything. I just show up. It was the coolest way to travel.
Yeah.
And I got to meet the most interesting people.
Yeah.
So we filmed a second season, but then CNN sort of imploded, so we bought the show back. So now it's going to end up on the second season will be launched on a different streaming service.
Awesome.
And I filmed a second show that's going to be in a big streaming service. That also just came as an opportunity. I don't know. I just, it's my dad. He's a pretty crazy guy. I'm sure you can relate.
No idea what you're talking about.
And I was arguing with him about something, and he's like, Carlton, you're really overthinking it. He's like, life's just about doing cool shit, and then you die. He's like, that's it.
Yeah.
Right?
I think I'd like your dad.
Yeah. He's like, that was it. So we just have to remind ourselves, like, say yes to a lot of stuff.
Right.
It's a cool experience. And, I always look at, like, Maya's dad, and I look at his story and everything he did. I'm like, I'm so behind. Like, he did the coolest things, right? I'm like, your dad was like a superhero. There's like the kind of, like, he's like a James Bond like figure of all the interesting things that he did.
Yeah.
It was nuts, and I just want to live an interesting life and do interesting things. And sometimes you make a fool out of yourself, but who cares?
Right.
I think you've got to give yourself the grace to try a bunch of stuff and fail at some stuff and learn and do other stuff. And in the end, who cares?
Right.
Realistically,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the Gustav Dallavalle, the stories that were swapped. We were at one of the neighbors' houses yesterday for a tasting and listening to Mary Minor describe legendary. Owned every room he ever walked in.
Yeah, because
like
most people don't know about his life before wine. I mean,
Yeah.
it's insane what that guy did in his lifetime. And I think the world has changed where people are so much more risk adverse. There were a lot of people like Gustav in the world that just did a whole lot of interesting things. They would switch careers and move to different parts of the country and the world. And I don't know, I think people are willing to take more risk. Maybe because people died earlier, life seemed more finite. I don't know.
Less exposed.
Well, people just want to play it so safe now. And I think it's really important for just to try stuff, right? And I feel like in the wine industry as well, sometimes we get so comfortable and also so afraid to try things and change things because people are going to critique us if it fails. And I think that's so silly, It's one of these things, like, if you're just going to care about what people think about you, you'll never try anything. It's like, someone judges you for trying something that doesn't work out. Well, they're probably just jealous. Right. Like, they're probably sitting on the couch doing nothing. Right. It's like people can't be concerned with that. And I think our industry needs more of that, right? And I hate when people critique, like, young winemakers for, making a style of wine that maybe even they don't like. Like, oh, this natural wine guy. I'm like, look, she's just trying something. That's what this is about. It's an art form. They're just experimenting and trying. Like, I actually support some of those wines I don't even like. Why? It's because I want them to be successful and I want them to feel empowered, right? To keep trying, right? You look at the Northern California regions and we're so established now, we forget 100 years ago when people were just trying stuff and they weren't making any money, but there was just this vigor to like try stuff. And we're only here because back then they tried a lot of stuff. Right. Some things failed and they tried something else, and it's like we need more of that energy of experimentation, of trying things. And we should be applauding people doing that, especially young winemakers, totally. And supporting them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the basis of this podcast is, I think if you look back, it's mainly young winemakers who, are new to it, and we're just trying to help them tell their story.
Oh, it's super important.
And there's nothing better when a listener buys some of their wine.
Yeah, and I think it's why podcasts are so important, because I think mass media are they
Dead.
Almost never give those types of estates any ink or video time, because they're not incentivized to, right? Like, media is clickbait now because everything's digital, and to get paid by your ads, companies, is someone's got to click it. So if it's an estate that's small and up and coming, no one's heard about it, they're not going to click it, and they don't get the exposure that they deserve. So they're writing about, I mean, we end up being in that camp because we're a big enough company in the sense that we have really established brands. But podcasts are a lot of times like the only outlet. But I find it's a far more valuable and interesting media genre than maybe anything before, because no one can manipulate what you're saying. They can't take anything out of context, and you have nuance because you're discussing things, and that'll never happen in an article, never.
Or a CNN interview, just to throw them out.
Correct. That's actually very factual. Oh, this is beautiful.
Yeah, the Stony Hill.
Stony Hill's beautiful. They're all beautiful wines, and all completely unique.
Yeah,
And that's-
singular, standalone.
Yeah, that was always a thing for us. We said we want to line all of our wines up, and no one should know that we own them. Right? That's really important for us.
There should be no follow through on it. There should
No.
be no line through them. Yeah.
And again, with brands like Stony Hill and Heitz, there's that balance of respecting the historical nature of
Yes.
it and bringing in new ideas and new technology and which seems like you've straddled that line really
try.
well, because again, I've had a little bit of Heitz, a little bit of Stony Hill in my life. These aren't different
No.
than those wines. They're just newer and taking another step forward.
Well, whatever you do, someone's going to critique you, right? So you got to cut out the noise. And as long as you're honest with yourself and your intentions, that's it. Again, in the end, it's what's in the bottle. I just don't listen to the noise anymore. I used to when I was younger. I don't anymore. Like, I'm a big believer, not everyone's opinion matters. They really don't.
Only person whose opinion that matters is Angela Nader sitting up front.
correct.
Making sure she gets her bottle of Pinot Grigio.
That's correct. I love that people call me out.
Yeah, she's like,
In public.
Carlton's coming here. I got
yeah.
a bone to pick with him.
And talk about that Pinot Gris Burgess. That's a really cool wine because we bought that vineyard, and it was Old Virus Chardonnay, and then like 3 or 4 rows of Pinot Gris that was planted by John Kongsgaard in that, because he worked at that winery at Luna at the time. And it was part of that era where everyone was doing Cal Italian and bringing back Budwood from like Free Willy and so forth. And Megan at the time, I'll give the credit to her for sure. We were ripping out the Chardonnay because it was a disaster. And she said, "Can we keep the Pinot Gris?" And I go, "Megan." I said, I love you to death. I said, but, and I'm very open-minded. I said, but Napa Valley Pinot Gris, I said, she was, "Give me one shot." I said, "All right, Megan." I said, "You got one vintage. And if this wine sucks," I says, "it's gone." And she made the wine into her, she must have put so much energy into making that wine good. It was really exceptional. Like, we make about 100 cases.
How much Pinot Gris was actually in the Pinot Gris, though?
We don't know. But it's a really, really delicious wine, and she experimented a lot with those little bits of fruit that she had, and so we decided to keep because it's really fantastic. And she reached out to John Kongsgaard, and he helped her with it. Like, she really put out all the big guns to try to make. When you bring
you're making some Cabernet over in the other room there.
Yeah, correct. So when you bring John Kongsgaard in to consult on your Pinot Gris, he's like, "You got to help me."
100 cases of Pinot Gris.
Yeah. No, but in testament, the wine's fantastic. And obviously it made an impact because this lady, I've never met her. She feels pretty passionate about it. So I'm gonna send her some Pinot Gris.
Fired up.
I'm gonna send her some Pinot Gris.
Go find some Burgess
on
Pinot
me.
Gris if you
on
can.
Me. Yes.
Before Angela buys it all. She's gonna be back in the club.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. This has been another great episode. Thanks for coming over the hill. They didn't check your ID or anything coming over the hill.
Passport stamp. No, he went Oakville grade. He went behind the
I went
lines.
over grade, yes. Yeah, I hid.
Don't go back on Highway 12.
I don't know. I always feel that they check when we're going that way.
Yeah,
They check more than when you guys come here.
No, I love it over here. I'm a very curious guy, so I my things is weird, but sometimes if she's like dealing with her horses, I'll like take a car and I'll drive up, especially like Sonoma Mountain in that area.
Yeah.
I think it's stunning.
Yeah.
Because I go to the Sonoma Zen Center, the
Yeah.
Buddhist temple
Yeah.
up there, and I just think it's the coolest part. I love it up there.
You get to that area where it's one lane through those redwoods.
Oh yeah,
man, that's awesome.
Oh, it's stunning. I just love driving up there and like walking through people's vineyards who I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, they love when you do that.
Call next time. We know some people up there. We can get you some gate codes and keep you from getting shot at.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate the time. Most importantly.
We usually right now we do shout outs. Do you have anything going on at any of the wineries you want to shout out?
Easy answer is too much.
Okay.
But you can always go to lawrencewineestates.com, and from there you can click to any of the estates, including Chateau Lescombe, which obviously is across the pond, but you can find out everything we're doing.
I
through those
had
sites.
a great dinner with Axel.
Oh, he's a rock star.
And DC and those wines,
Yeah.
Obviously, none of them were necessarily the new wines,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
one of the.
Yeah, he's making waves like his 24s, which is a really, really challenging vintage of Bordeaux. I mean, he got higher scores and ratings than most of the first grows. It was
So
the
that
first
made-
time Lescombe
made
got a higher
friends.
score than
Yeah.
Chateau Margaux.
Ooh.
Ooh, that was tough.
Talk about stirring things up.
Stir it up a
Yeah,
little bit, just a little
but
disruptive.
I mean, he's one of, I think, our generation's like super talents in wine, and very humble, which is a rare combination. So, yeah.
All right. Any of like the socials? Obviously, following Carlton McCoy is a great Instagram follow, but shout out the rest of
very poorly managed.
Well,
but,
that's what makes it. It's real.
Yeah,
it's clearly not a curate. No, you're not
No, it's
hired
not
some
curated.
social media
No.
manager
No.
there. But how to follow and get a hold of? You just go to Lawrence Estates, I guess. Lawrence Estate.
Yeah. If you actually just go to @Lawrence Wine Estates, we have all the estates there. You can click one and go to the individual pages to find out. I mean, again, I co-founded the company. I oversee it. I always make sure that it's really clear that my teams really do the day-to-day work. So our teams at our estates are super passionate and committed, and I think it's one of the most inspiring and gratifying things for me is just to work with this team and just seeing their level of commitment. It's I'm just very grateful. Yeah.
Sam, got anything?
Well, I mean, not as much, but it feels like as much as Carlton's got going on. We have some new releases happening. Check your email. July 7th, is that the Sunday after 4th of July, is Hattie Craven, Red, White, and Rosé here at the Tasting House Vinyl Sunday. We had to move Stanley Mouse Appreciation Day because this band called the Grateful Dead stepped on it. So that was going to be August 3rd. Is now August 10th. And then the rest of our events are up on the website. I do have a note from Barbara Gorder.
Yes.
The shout out for DTC Symposium 2026. She's on top of it. The website is up, dtcwinesymposium.com. Register. There's early bird pricing. There's sponsorship packages. Sponsor your favorite podcast to go down there.
Yep.
I mean, they're sponsoring us, but we could always use more.
Right.
We'll take more sponsors. Always. Back in Monterey, January 20th through 22nd, 2026.
Awesome.
So
freethegrapes.org.
Freethegrapes.org. Mark your calendars. Come watch us be on the Truman Show for 3 days.
Right.
It was awesome for everybody else.
Right.
So that's... And then, I don't know. What do you got?
Plenty of appointments open at the tank.
Go to the tank.
Come visit me and let's do a tasting. And
you got rosé left still?
I still have rosé left.
Right.
We still have Evangelo Carignan available. Kerrigan. No, that's what's going on.
Okay.
At the time that this is...
It's June 6th that's coming out.
This is June 6th, yeah. So a couple days after that, I will be doing my my chef cycle ride. And so...
donate.
So, yeah, if people want to donate, help feed some kids,
And make
chefcycle.org.
Bart bust his ass around.
Yeah, you know what? Here's what I want people to understand. That I'm suffering all 100 miles 2 days in a row the whole time, and I'm suffering because you guys are willing to pay money to feed kids.
Where's
and
the
that's
ride?
where it comes from. For the past 10 years, it's been here in Sonoma County, but this year they moved it to Bend, Oregon. So we're going to be
Bend's
up
a cool
there
town.
in the mountains, yeah. So it should be really good. There's
Awesome.
110 chefs this year.
Cool.
From all over the
And
country.
one winemaker?
And one winemaker, one grape grower.
Okay. Who'd you get?
Mike Pucci from the San Giacomo's.
Yeah, okay.
He rides it. So he's quite a rider. So anyway, that's all.
All right. Go. There's a link on your Instagram.
Yeah, just hit me up on any of the socials. It's
Go
there.
throw down to watch Bart suffer from afar.
$10 $10 provides food for 100 meals.
Wow.
So it doesn't have to be big donations.
All right, feed
I'd
some
rather
kids.
have 10 people donate $10 each than feel, pressured. So anyway, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you everybody for listening. Subscribe, review,
Tell your friends.
but
only the cool ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Carlton.
We'll see you soon.
Appreciate you
Thank you.
coming over.